Morning, everybody. I'm Chris Weiss, a Johannesburg-based principal with Elixir, a global boutique consultancy. I spend a lot of my time working with corporate clients to develop and execute on their innovation agenda. And I strongly believe that one of the ways to make innovation effective for corporates is partnerships between themselves and startups. This can help accelerate growth and drive huge benefits for both parties. Over the past 5 years, Elixir have established a global innovation network made up of some of the world's leading VCs, startups, accelerators, and venture development companies. And we work closely with this network to give our clients the unique insights and relationships from the ecosystem. I'm here today with my colleague, Linda Mashloko, and Charles Freedman from Founders Factory Africa, part of our network. And we're wanting to have a conversation and talk about how to make partnerships between corporates and startups successful.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Charles Freedman. I head partnerships at Founders Factory Africa. We are a venture development company that invests in early stage technology startups, and we build businesses across Africa. Linda?
Very cool, Charles. Hi, everyone. My name is Linda Mashloko. I'm a new manager at Elixir, and I'm basically from a strategy and startups background, mostly in the on-demand South African industry.
Fantastic. Guys, it's great to chat to you all this morning. I'm really excited we got to finally have this conversation. We've been waiting a while. To give some context as to what brought us all here, we talk to businesses every single day across different industries, across different countries, around the value and opportunity that sits with corporates and startups. And the insights that we've gleaned is that there's a lot of interest on both sides to partner and create value for each other. And there's quite a lot of stuff that's happening across the continent in this regard. But equally, there's an enormous amount of challenge that both sides face when trying to actually realize that value. And so one of the things that we've been thinking about together is what can we do to help bridge the gap between corporates and startups in order to fuel innovation and scale on both sides.
Absolutely. From the corporate perspective, I spend a lot of time working with corporates, and the case exists very strongly here to be able to leverage relationships with startups to gain capability, to have access to new models, new business models, new ways of working, and the opportunities are really endless. I think what's really interesting is that historically, I think both corporates and startups are really not set up to really engage effectively with each other. And it's about creating these conversations that enable us to give them the basis on which to interact effectively, set them up with the right mindset to engage with each other and leverage the best out of both industries.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Chris. I think if I remember back to my early days at when Uber was first expanding in Johannesburg and Pretoria, one of the first major partnerships was an Uber and WesBank partnerships, where Uber had struck a deal to get some vehicle financing for their drivers via WesBank. And I think the challenge over there was, you find that a lot of traditional corporates don't have open systems, or they still operate off these legacy systems that make it difficult to sort of form a partnership with startups. So you can imagine the integration into each other's systems was a really tough challenge. And startups tend to move at a much faster pace, which bigger corporates tend to try to take the time and really flesh out a product before they bring it to market. But I think that's changing a lot now. And as I've seen from the startup side, we're seeing a lot more partnerships with bigger corporates that are happening a lot faster than they used to happen.
Absolutely, Linda. I think what we experience is that it's still not happening fast enough. And I think that that's just an opportunity for everyone involved. And it's really why we started this conversation. Over the next 3 episodes of this series, we'll be covering 3 different topics. The first is the case for change, so why there's value in corporate startup collaboration to fuel innovation. The second is finding the perfect partner, so helping corporates understand how to navigate the startup ecosystem and what to consider in making decisions to partner. And then finally, something you alluded to, Linda, is making partnerships work because it's not a smooth ride for the most part. And that's something we're going to get into in these conversations.
Absolutely.
Great.
So if we talk about the case for change, I mean, I started outlining it just a little bit earlier in the conversation. I think there's synergies for all parties to really get involved in this way of work. And I think that what is critical as a starting point is that corporates and startups and the enablers of startups really are clear as to what the USP that they bring to the party is. And that will effectively enable people to work closely together to the benefit of both parties. Charles, Linda, your thoughts?
Yeah, so for me, the case for change is now bigger than ever. For me, just off the top of my head, if I just think what has really made, or motivated a lot of the corporates or the startups to really come together is you're finding that startups have completely different and new markets. So it's, it's students, it's young adults entering the market who don't traditionally bank or really transact yet with some of the big corporates that we have around. So there's a really nice synergy over there in that they're accessing new markets, which they traditionally did not serve before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's right, Linda. One of the things I reflect on, having spent most of my career in the corporate space, is that the mindset and the skill set associated with ways of work in startups are completely different to those in corporates. And I think that the opportunity for corporates is not only, I guess, immediately commercial, which there needs to be one, but also the idea that you can shift the culture just by having exposure to different ways of thinking and different ways of doing. I mean, I was speaking to an executive last week, and one of the sentiments he shared was that one of the drivers for their partnering with startups is not just purely commercial, but it's also just to have a bellwether of what's happening in the market, because startups represent opportunities that corporates probably haven't identified yet, because they're much more incentivized to stay on top of what customers and users actually need, whereas corporates, and I'm generalizing for the most part, don't have the mechanisms in place to truly understand all of their customers in the way that startups do.
And I think that's absolutely critical. I think you raise a really, really key point there, Charles, is the motivation behind doing this. I think everybody needs to be clear as to what they are going to and aren't going to get out of a partnership up front. And for the corporate, it may well be that it's a learning experience. They're getting capability. They are expanding into a new market, as Linda really pointed out. And I think it's not always about the pure business case in those early days. I think it's a learning experience, and failure is a very important part of that learning experience. And that's something that corporates often aren't comfortable with.
To pick up on the failure piece, I think it's a really interesting use of language. The language of corporates is success and failure. It's very binary. And that is what part of the problem. In a corporate space, one's often tasked with setting up or putting out what success looks like over a 3-year period before you make an investment. And so what you end up with is committing to making a 10 million Rand investment over 3 years to generate X return. And the challenge of doing that is that you've really no idea about how it's all going to work out, and you're just making it up to conform to a process that's been prescribed and defined and is part of a legacy way of work. And it's no surprise that the majority of business cases don't yield the value that's expected of them. And from a startup perspective, it's a different mindset. It's a case of, well, let's make the target shorter. Let's set a metric associated to what we hope to achieve or test, and then let's learn from the experience and keep building on what we're doing, managing expectation around what the ultimate goal is going to look like. And that is, I think, invaluable if a corporate's able to crack that with the assets at its disposal and the network that it has access to. That is infinitely valuable.
True. And I think another, sort of barrier that's really preventing these sort of partnerships to flourish, which I do think work definitely needs to be done, and both on the startup side and on the corporate side, is you may find that, there's clashing of culture and values around what each business represents. whether it be color scheme or, what they believe in. And so that's usually become a challenge to try and merge that and, bring out to the market that startup XYZ is known for doing this, and, the corporate is known for doing something else, and just sort of bringing those like two sort of ideas together to create a new specialized product is something that has really been a challenge. But there have been other startups that have been able to find the right corporates to partner with, just so that the value proposition is not too far off what the corporate has already put onto the market.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think startups really. I was speaking to another executive in Nigeria this week, and they shared with me that instead of them telling me what their priority areas were in the space they operated in, they wanted me to come with all of the different things that we had exposure to and suggestions of different areas they could play in. And I found that really refreshing and forward thinking. Typically, it's a demand-led process where the corporate says, I need this, I want this, because that's what sits in my budget. And that's what I've told the board that we're aiming for. But equally, like that also means that there's lots of lunch left on the table. And that's a big opportunity cost of that approach. So I was really encouraged by the conversation I had with a particularly forward-thinking big organization this week.
Absolutely, and I'm finding that those conversations are more and more on the table, and I think that the mindset is starting to change. I think you mentioned sort of the trifecta, Charles, of the mindset, skill set, and toolkit to be able to execute on these. I think that we are seeing a shift in the mindset, and I think that the next piece for these organizations is to get the skill set and the toolkit to execute on them. And obviously, you outlined sort of how we're going to go through this process in terms of this discussion. And finding the perfect partner and making the partnerships work is really about those other two sort of pieces of the puzzle, so to speak.
Yeah, I think something we haven't spoken about is not only commercial value from the perspective of alignment to whatever it is the corporate wants to achieve, but also the fact that investing in early stage businesses and pairing early stage businesses with the assets of a large corporate can elicit huge returns for the corporate itself. And what we've seen globally in the last 20 years is this enormous growth in corporate venture capital functions who are trying very hard to kind of create that synergy. It's not always as easy as it sounds, as we'll get into, because even if a venture capital firm is in a corporate, there's no guarantee that those investments will be able to take advantage of the corporate itself, recognizing how complex it is. But I think it's a really useful data point to speak to the sentiment and how things are changing.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think what is interesting is if you look around the success or how those CVC or firms that have gone down the CVC route are measuring success. And I think that that's where a lot of disappointment has come through. Because if you are measuring it purely on returns, you often are disappointed. It goes back to our earlier conversation, is it has to be part of a learning experience, and getting away from that paradigm of success or failure. It's opening yourself up to new themes in the market, new trends, and really enabling you to embrace those in your business as you shift and diversify for the future.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Chris. And I think, as you were mentioning earlier, it's not just about the returns. The VC model it works in some cases, but I do think, that daily sort of having that execution partner who's been able to do, certain activities at a larger scale really does help. I'd like to maybe just draw two startups that I know of. So you look at Pick n Pay's partnership with the Bottles app, which was traditionally an alcohol delivery app, right? And, they were able to integrate into each other's systems and perform deliveries. But then when the COVID pandemic hit, they couldn't deliver alcohol anymore. They were able to quickly pivot within a week or two to then delivering groceries, which is, an opportunity that they would have not had they not had that initial partnership with the Pick n Pay group in the first place. So it seems that these big corporate partnerships are also allowing startups to pivot into new areas of business that they typically would have never had access to, even if they had the money to try and grow the business in other ways.
really interesting case study.
I'm conscious of time, guys.
Absolutely.
Probably at our cutoff. But it's been an awesome conversation, and I think we've all done a great job of convincing ourselves, and hopefully a few people watching, on the value of corporate startup collaboration. I'm really excited about the next session, where we'll be tackling the topic of navigating the startup ecosystem and how to find the perfect partner. Look forward to continuing the conversation. I'll speak to you all really soon.
Cool. Cheers, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.